Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into one of the most closely watched, quietly devastating, and genuinely unresolved lives of the 20th century. The 16 years Diana Spencer spent inside an institution that had been perfecting the art of surviving its occupants for 1,000 years. Not the fairy tale, not the magazine covers. The real one. The one with silent palace corridors and a sketchbook and a glass cabinet in Sandringham and a tunnel in Paris and a decade of questions that still don't have clean answers. If you enjoy this kind of careful, unhurried, deeply human history, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, only if it's actually your thing. And to Laurie Coronado, who suggested this topic, thank you. Genuinely, I hope you're somewhere comfortable and ready to drift off. That means don't listen to this at your job. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always somehow 2 inches the morning somewhere, and tonight that feels appropriate. Dim the lights. Turn on a fan if you have one. Get comfortable and pull the blanket up, and maybe tuck your feet in, just because the corridors we're about to walk are long and carpeted and very, very cold. Have you ever tried to picture being 19 years old, engaged to the future king, and completely alone in Buckingham Palace with no one to call? What the dress looks like when it was fitted months ago and you've nearly stopped eating? Did anyone in that building notice? Or did they just note that the waistline needed taking in? How do you purge 4 times a day inside a schedule someone else built for you and call it the only freedom you have? What exactly do you write on a medical form when the institution has decided your illness is a PR problem and not a diagnosis? Could you shake hands with an AIDS patient on camera in 1987 while the people behind you are quietly furious about it, and then go home to a marriage that ended somewhere around the bracelet engraved with someone else's nickname? And what happens to 30 years of conspiracy theories when 200 investigators spend 3 years, interview 175 witnesses, and produce an 832-page report, and half the world still doesn't believe them? Congratulations. You've just woken up in Althorpe, Northamptonshire, 1969. You are 8 years old and the house is very quiet in a way it wasn't yesterday. Good luck. You are 8 years old, and the house has learned a new sound, yours, crying, in the dark after your mother's car disappears down the drive. There are 2 houses now, and you belong to a schedule. Weekdays in one, holidays negotiated between adults who no longer speak directly, a small suitcase by the door that never quite finishes unpacking. The grown-ups have a word for what you are: custody. It means you can be awarded, like a trophy or a debt. You have been awarded to your father, and somewhere in the quiet you have decided this is your fault. You are Diana Frances Spencer. Born 1 July 1961, 3rd child, Sandringham adjacent in all the ways that matter, your family's seat at Althorpe holds Rubens and Van Dyck on its walls, and your father had stood at attention beside 2 separate monarchs. This is not a family that sits at the edges of anything. It is ancient, titled, and entirely sure of itself. A family so close to the crown, it practically wears it to dinner. And yet the divorce hits you the way divorce hits a child, which is personally. Your mother, Frances Roche, leaves in 1969 and a court awards custody to your father, Viscount Althorpe. Frances had wanted the children. She didn't get them. She got the blame instead. And some of it, in the way children absorb blame like carpet absorbs water, seeps into you. You'll carry this explanation for years, quietly, privately, the way you'll later carry most things, that something about you caused the leaving. Let's talk about Althorpe. It's large the way cathedrals are large, not warm large, but significant large, the kind of large that echoes. You grow up between its corridors and the Norfolk countryside with 3 siblings and a father who is polite and present, but not precisely expressive. A nanny named Janet Thompson looks after the youngest children. You, Diana, follow her around the house with the focused attention of someone who has recently learned that the adults who are supposed to stay don't always. The loneliness isn't dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It just settles in, the way cold settles into a stone floor, slowly, completely, until you stop noticing it's there. Your older sister Sarah, as it happens, is the one who eventually dates Charles briefly in 1977, which is the kind of family detail that gets quietly set aside later. And your brother Charles, 9 years you'll have together at Althorpe before the whole shape of your life changes. You are the girl who cried at the window. You are also the girl who swam competitively, danced in her bedroom, and could make anyone in a room feel they were the most important person in it, a skill that looks like warmth and is also, partly, what happens when you spend your early years making sure you're worth keeping. You leave school at 16, no qualifications, twice through the O-levels, twice out the other side with nothing to show. This will later be cited as evidence of something: lack of ambition, lack of ability, lack of application. It's cited incorrectly. You leave school the way many children of this class and this era leave school, because leaving was an option, and staying had stopped working, and nobody looked closely enough at why. You take a flat in Coleherne Court with flatmates. You teach at a kindergarten. You are 19 and good with children and reasonably happy and completely unaware that a committee somewhere has been noting your name. The committee isn't formal. It doesn't have minutes. But it exists, the way a lot of important things in this world exist, through the quiet, mutual understanding of people who have known each other since school, who share the same grouse moors and the same inherited sense of how things ought to be arranged. The Prince of Wales is 31. He needs a wife. The wife needs to be suitable, young, and, a requirement spoken carefully, between trusted people, untouched by prior relationships in any way that might embarrass anyone. You are suitable, you are young, you are 19, and you have never, so far as anyone can establish, been the subject of a news story. The suitcase by the door is still not quite unpacked. It never really was. You are a Spencer, which means the royal family is not a fairy tale to you. They are, more or less, the neighbours. Your father carried a ceremonial sword for 2 monarchs. Your grandmother has rooms at Kensington Palace, the kind of address handed out by the Queen herself. You grow up at Althorpe, a house so large it has Rubens on the walls and a name older than most countries. The lesson arrives early, and nobody ever has to say it aloud. People like you exist near the throne, useful and decorative, and expected to know exactly where you stand in the arrangement. The arrangement, when it arrives, moves quickly. You meet Charles properly in the summer of 1980. You are 19. He is 31 and has been looking, in the way that an institution looks, for someone appropriate. The meetings are careful, spaced, overseen by a social architecture so practiced it barely shows its workings. You meet him 13 times before the engagement is announced. 13, which is basically the number of first dates it takes to agree on a restaurant, except each of these is a audition with the succession of the British Crown quietly attached to the outcome. Charles, by his own private account to a close friend, is not in love with you. He intends to do his duty. This information does not reach you in any form you can act on. What reaches you instead is the momentum, the way the rooms fill with expectation, the way certain conversations stop when you enter, the way your own family watches you with the look of people who have already decided the ending. The machinery of your world has been pointing in this direction for longer than the courtship has. You can feel it. You can't find the brakes. On 24 February 1981, the engagement is announced. You are moved first to Clarence House, then to a suite in Buckingham Palace. This is where the lesson about the arrangement becomes specific and physical. The rooms are vast. The carpets absorb every sound. There are no ordinary noises, no television coming through a wall, no smell of someone else's cooking, no door opening at the end of the corridor because someone is coming home. The staff are impeccably polite, the way airport security is impeccably polite, efficient, correct, and constitutionally incapable of asking how you're doing and meaning it. Charles continues his life. Camilla exists, somewhere, in the texture of things you can't quite name yet. You wander. The corridors are museum length and museum quiet, lined with portraits of people who have been dead for centuries and who look, all of them, like they knew something you don't. A footman named Gerald moves a tray somewhere in a distant room. The sound reaches you several seconds after it should. You are 19 years old and you are alone inside one of the most famous addresses in the world, and the two facts are not in contradiction. The wedding date is set for 29 July 1981. The dress is designed by David and Elizabeth Emanuel and has a 25-foot train, longer than most studio apartments, trailing behind you like the world's most expensive liability. It was fitted months earlier, when you were a slightly different person in a slightly different body. By the morning of the ceremony, it hangs on you differently. Nobody says anything about the difference. The dress has its own opinions about what has happened in the interim, but the dress doesn't get a say either. St. Paul's Cathedral holds 2,000 people. The television audience is 750 million. The crowds outside number 600,000, which is roughly the population of a medium-sized city, all of them standing on a weekday morning to watch a 19-year-old walk up an aisle. At the altar, in front of every camera in the known world, you transpose Charles's names: Philip, Charles, Arthur, George, delivered in the wrong order, quietly, under your breath. He forgets to promise you his worldly goods. Both of you move on. The choir fills the space where the vows should have landed. You sit the exams twice, and twice the results come back the same. O-levels failed. Nobody in your family treats this as a catastrophe, because the things a girl like you is actually being graded on were never printed on those papers. You are good with small children, good at the piano, good at being pleasant in a difficult room. You are sent to a finishing school in Switzerland to learn the rest: posture, French, how to enter a room without announcing it. You leave school at 16 with no qualifications and one quiet talent nobody bothers to score, which is people. The finishing school is called Institut Alpin Vidamanet. It sits in the mountains and costs more than most people's annual salary, and what it teaches you is essentially the same curriculum as being a very expensive lamp. How to stand correctly, how to look appropriate in a difficult chair, how to make the people around you feel comfortable enough to ignore you. You pick up some French, not enough French. You come home after a term, because there is apparently a limit to how much finishing one person needs. Back in England, you work as a kindergarten teaching assistant at a school called Young England in Pimlico. You are 19. You earn roughly £1 an hour, which is less than the petrol to drive there. You are good at this. Not good in a professionally certified way. You have no qualifications, but good in the way that small children know when an adult is genuinely paying attention and not just performing it. The children do not care about your posture. They do not check your vows. They just like you. This is where Charles finds you, or where you find each other again. More precisely, you'd met briefly before, at an occasion involving a ploughed field and some shooting, which is how introductions work in that world. He is 31, older, dutiful, and quietly spoken for. You are 19. He has a title and an heir requirement, and a woman he already loves, in roughly that order. You have a flat in Colhern Court you share with 3 friends and a tendency to take the stairs 2 at a time. The committee in charge of finding him a suitable match has apparently reviewed the available options and circled your name. 13 meetings. That's the total. 13 evenings and afternoons spread across a few months, which is basically the amount of time it takes to decide whether you like a new dentist. Each one comes with an audience, an itinerary, or a protocol. There is no quiet dinner where someone forgets to be impressive. There is no ordinary Tuesday. A woman named Barbara Cartland, who wrote over 700 romance novels and was your step-grandmother, would arguably have recognized the structure. She had invented it. Charles tells a friend he is not in love with you but intends to do his duty. This information does not reach you at the time. It is the kind of thing that gets stored somewhere quiet, like a note slipped under a door in a house you haven't moved into yet. Somewhere in there a proposal happens, in the nursery at Windsor, he asks. You laugh, not unkindly, but you genuinely aren't sure if he means it. He means it. You say yes, and then you say yes again when he asks if you're sure, and then the machinery of the institution begins to move, and the machinery is very large, and it moves in one direction. The engagement is announced on the 24th of February 1981. You are wearing a blue suit. You tell a reporter, you are in love. Charles, standing next to you, is asked if he is in love too. He says, whatever in love means. This sentence is broadcast to the nation. Nobody stops broadcasting. You are 19. You have twice failed the same exam. You have a talent nobody scores. And in roughly 5 months you will be standing at the end of the longest aisle in England with 25 feet of dress behind you, trying to remember his name in the right order. You are 19 and you have a job, which for a girl of your background is almost eccentric. 3 mornings a week you help at a kindergarten, wiping noses and assembling small disasters out of poster paint. You share a flat with 3 other girls, and your name is on a chore rota stuck to the fridge. You drive yourself places. You buy your own food. This is the last stretch of your life in which you are an ordinary person doing ordinary things, moving through the city unwatched, and you do not yet know to hold on to it. The flat is in Colhern Court, Earl's Court, 2nd floor. Your flatmates are Virginia, Anne, and Carolyn, and the four of you function like any 20-something shared household. Someone's dishes are in the sink, someone's milk has been quietly used. You pay your share of the rent. You keep normal hours, more or less. When the phone rings, it is usually for you, because you are the sociable one, the one who laughs easily. Nobody is photographing your front door yet. The door is just a door. Let's talk about the job. It's not a career. It's a Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday arrangement at Young England Kindergarten in Pimlico, where you help small children do things that small children do, which is mostly fall over and be suspicious of lunch. You earn about £1 an hour, which even in 1980 is the kind of wage that suggests the job is more about purpose than income. You are good with the children. You are patient in the specific way that people are patient when they genuinely don't find it difficult. The children do not require anything complicated from you. You like that about them. Charles enters this life the way a weather system enters a forecast, gradually, then all at once. You have met him before, technically. He is 12 years older. He has been in the newspapers your entire life. Your family has been connected to the crown for generations. Your father was equerry to both King George VI and the current Queen, which means the Windsors are not strangers so much as a constant background condition, like a very grand motorway you've always lived near but never driven on. The Althorpe estate has Rubens and Van Dyck on the walls. You know who these people are. You are not dazzled. You are 19. The courtship is 6 months long, which sounds reasonable until you count the actual meetings. 13. 13 times across 6 months before he asks and you say yes. That's roughly the cadence of a pen-pal relationship, except the letters are replaced by stilted country weekends and a man 12 years your senior who is still, quietly, attached to someone else. You say yes anyway. You say yes because the momentum of the thing is like standing on a moving walkway. Technically, you could step off, but the walkway is 1,000 years old, and everyone you've ever known is on it, and the destination has already been announced. Susan Crawford, your flatmate Carolyn's older sister, notices something in you at this stage that she'll describe later as a kind of alert, watchful, and contained stillness. You're not anxious, exactly. You're watching. The way you watch, in these last ordinary months, is the way you'll watch for the rest of your life, taking careful note of rooms, of who's looking, of where the exits are. You don't know that yet. Right now, you're just a 19-year-old on a chore rota with paint on her sleeve, standing at the start of something enormous, holding a very ordinary mop. You are being considered, though nobody uses that word to your face. The prince is 31 and looking for a wife the way an institution fills a vacancy, and you happen to tick every box on a list you have never been shown. Aristocratic, Protestant, fond of children, and crucially, with a past clean enough to survive a tabloid. You meet him perhaps a dozen times. There are no long conversations, no shared years, no slow understanding of one another. There is an interview disguised as a courtship, and you, at 19, are doing remarkably well in it. 13 meetings. That's the number. 13 times in 6 months, across dinners and country weekends and events where 50 other people are also in the room, which is basically getting engaged after 13 first dates, except the dates were arranged by a committee that had already booked the church. You don't go to the cinema together. You don't argue about something small and find out what the other person is like when they're wrong. You attend. You are attended. The distinction matters more than it seems. Charles, for his part, tells a close friend he is not in love with you but intends to do his duty. That sentence exists. It was said out loud, to another person, who remembered it. He is not unkind about it. Unkindness would require a kind of engagement with the situation he doesn't quite have. He is simply practical in the way that very old institutions teach their members to be practical, which is to say, at some cost to everyone it's actually practiced on. You, mostly. On 24 February 1981, the engagement is announced. You are photographed in a blue suit, holding his arm, smiling at a level that suggests enormous effort or enormous training, possibly both. The ring is a 12-carat oval sapphire surrounded by 14 diamonds, which you chose from a catalogue. A catalogue. There are 6 options. It's less like choosing your future and more like selecting a duvet cover, except the duvet cover will be photographed on your hand for the next 15 years. Let's talk about what happens immediately after. You are moved out of your Earl's Court flat, The one with 3 friends and a shared kitchen and people who knew your name before anyone told them to, and into Clarence House. Then, Buckingham Palace. A suite of rooms is assigned to you. The rooms are large, carpeted, and almost completely silent in the way that only very old buildings with very thick walls can be silent, which is not peaceful silence, but the silence of a place where ordinary noise has been formally discouraged for centuries. A maid knocks once. A footman appears, adjusts something, disappears. Nobody is rude to you. Nobody is particularly anything to you. You are the future Princess of Wales, and you are 20 years old, and you don't know where the kitchen is, because there isn't one. Not for you. Charles continues his life. He sees Camilla. He keeps his schedule, his friends, his routine. He is not cruel about this either. He simply doesn't redirect. You are in adjacent orbits that have not yet found a reason to intersect for longer than protocol requires. You wander the corridors in the evenings sometimes, these vast museum-like hallways with paintings on every wall and no sense that anyone has ever lived here rather than been stationed here. It's an Airbnb with 600 rooms, no host, and a staff who are polite to you the way airport security is polite to you, professionally, completely, and without a trace of warmth. Sarah Beechwood, one of the ladies in waiting assigned to you during this period, later recalled that you sometimes stood at the window of your sitting room for long stretches of time, not looking at anything in particular. She brought you tea on those afternoons with the careful efficiency of someone performing a kindness they aren't sure will land. The tea arrived, you drank it. The window remained a window. You will later call these the loneliest weeks of your life. Not the worst, there are worse weeks coming, and they are already scheduled, just the loneliest. The momentum that carried you here, that institutional gravity you felt pulling from the moment his name was attached to yours, has deposited you in this suite and moved on to the next task. The next task is the wedding. The wedding is in 5 months. You have plenty of time to get to know the corridors. You say yes, and within days you stop being a girl with a flat and become a fixture to be installed. Your things are moved into Clarence House, then Buckingham Palace, into a suite of rooms chosen for you by people you have not met. The chore rota and the flatmates and the little car are gone. You are 19, engaged to the future king, and you have just been relocated into the middle of the most photographed family on earth. The ring is sapphire, and the whole country has already seen it. What you have not yet worked out is that you now live here alone. The rooms are large, cold, and carpeted in the kind of carpet that swallows sound rather than absorbing it. There are paintings in the corridors that cost more than most cities, and windows that face inward over courtyards no one walks through. No television noise bleeds through a shared wall. No one is burning toast. The palace is roughly the size of a small town, if a small town had been decorated by someone who wanted you to know that it didn't need you to like it. Let's talk about the silence. It is not peaceful. It is institutional. The quiet of a building that has never been briefly untidy, never had a row about whose turn it was to buy milk. An attendant named Mrs. Pendleton, expression neutral, posture, the architectural equivalent of a polite closed door, stops outside your suite each morning, adjusts something on the tray she's carrying that didn't need adjusting, and continues. She does not check on you. That is not her function. Her function is the tray. Charles is not here. Charles is doing Charles things, attending engagements, writing letters in that careful hand, being 31 and the Prince of Wales, which is a full schedule. He sees Camilla. You know this. You are not yet sure what to do with knowing it. The bracelet he gave her 2 days before the engagement, engraved GF, for Gladys and Fred, private nicknames, is already a fact that exists in your body before it becomes a fact you can name. You wander. This is what you will later call it. Wandering. Down corridors past Rubens, past rooms that feel like they're waiting for someone historically significant to enter them and are merely tolerating your presence in the meantime. Basically an Airbnb with 600 rooms, no host, and a staff who treat you with the same courtesy extended to someone whose name they've written on a lanyard. Polite, complete, not warm. You call your flatmates. You call your mother. You do not call Charles because Charles is, as they say, very busy. The phone in the suite has the quality of an object that knows it isn't being used enough. The evenings are long in the specific way evenings are long when no one is going to knock on the door. You will later say these were the loneliest weeks of your life. Not said for effect, said flat. The way you say something that has been sitting in you for 11 years before you finally say it out loud. The palace staff are professional. The rooms are warmed to a correct temperature. The flowers are replaced before they droop. Nothing is wrong, technically. Nothing is right, at all. You wake in Buckingham Palace and there is nothing for you to do. No job, no friends nearby, no instructions left on the table. The corridors run on for what feels like miles, carpeted and silent, and the staff are unfailingly polite in the particular way that keeps a clear distance between you and them. Your fiancé is elsewhere, at Highgrove, at engagements, living the life he already had. You walk the rooms simply to fill the hours. These weeks, you will say years later, are among the loneliest of your life, and the wedding has not even happened yet. Let's talk about the rooms. They are enormous and very clean, and they have the specific emotional temperature of a museum after closing time. Everything preserved, nothing lived in. There are paintings worth more than most buildings. There are carpets so thick they swallow footsteps. There is no ordinary noise. No television left on in a back room, no kettle, nobody arguing lightly about nothing in a kitchen. The palace has staff for every function, and the effect is that nothing ever visibly happens. It simply is. You are a person in it. You're 19. You've twice failed your O-levels and left school at 16. 6 months ago, you were a kindergarten teaching assistant. Now you live in a 600-room building, and the only people who speak to you are either employed to do so or practicing the specific, efficient warmth of someone who speaks to everyone this way. It's basically an Airbnb with a throne room, no host, and a staff who are polite to you the way airport security is polite to you, which is to say, correctly. Your waist is a problem, apparently. Charles mentioned it shortly after the engagement, something about being a bit chubby, and the comment lands the way only an offhand comment from the person whose opinion you are now structurally dependent on can land. The bulimia begins within the week. You don't describe it later as a breakdown. You describe it as the only thing that belongs to you. Your schedule is set by others. Your wardrobe is reviewed by others. Your public statements, your appearances, your adjacencies, all of it decided by a household that existed before you arrived and will exist long after. The eating is yours. The purging is yours. At your worst, it happens 4 times a day. Your waist, which Charles noticed at 29 inches, drops to 26 by early 1982. The problem, apparently, resolves itself. A dresser named Evelyn adjusts your engagement photographs with small, precise touches. A collar, a cuff, a half-inch of fabric that has shifted. She does this without speaking, which is efficient, and without looking at your face, which is kind. You don't know if it's intentional. You decide it is. The wedding dress is fitted months early. By the morning of the 29th of July, it hangs differently than it did when it was made. The seamstresses take it in and do not comment. The train still trails 25 feet behind you down the aisle of St. Paul's, which is longer than most studio apartments, and approximately 600,000 people line the streets to watch it pass. 750 million more watch on television. You mispronounce his name at the altar, Charles Philip instead of Philip Charles, and he forgets to promise you his worldly goods. The vows, technically, are incomplete in both directions. The photographs from that morning show you smiling. The dress had opinions about your posture, so you stand very straight. Your bouquet contains white roses, Veronica, and lily of the valley. Charles wears his naval uniform. The world calls it a fairy tale. You are in it, which is not the same as reading it. And somewhere in London, 2 days earlier, a bracelet changed hands. It was engraved GF, Gladys and Fred. You've found out by now what it means, who it's for, what it confirms. You board the carriage anyway. The train follows. You are handed, slowly and never all at once, the rulebook the palace refuses to print. You learn who you curtsy to and how deeply, and that the order shifts depending on who has married whom and in what year. You learn that you do not speak first, do not leave before the Queen, do not improvise. Your day is shaped by a schedule arranged by men in offices you will never visit, what you wear, where you stand, whose hand you take, and for how long. Every public gesture is, from now on, a matter of protocol, and protocol does not ask how you slept. Let's talk about the schedule. It arrives the evening before, typed, dated, and quietly non-negotiable, on cream paper, and it does not phrase things as suggestions. Tuesday. Engagement in Leeds, 10:15 a.m. Departure, 11:45 factory tour, 1 p.m. lunch with the Lord Mayor, 3:30 return. You do not select Tuesday. You do not select Leeds. You arrive at Leeds already knowing the name of the Lord Mayor's wife and that she prefers to be called Margaret, not Maggie, and you have 2 minutes with her before you are moved along by a hand at your elbow that belongs to no one in particular. The elbow is always there. It is very polite. The wardrobe operates on a separate filing system with opinions of its own. Hems at the knee, never above, colours that read well at distance, in a crowd. Nothing too tight, nothing that moves unpredictably in wind, and there is always wind at these things, as if the weather too has been briefed. A scarf that came loose once in 1982 generated a memo. You did not see the memo, but you understood its existence immediately, the way you understand a cold room without anyone telling you the temperature. A lady-in-waiting named Anne lingers near the door every morning with a schedule and a small pen, making a note when you ask a question, never when she answers it. She doesn't write down the answer. The answer isn't the part worth keeping. The maths underneath all of this is not comforting. You are 20 years old. You have never had a job with a pension or a leaving party or a box of your things to carry out. You went from a 2-bedroom flat in Earl's Court, shared with 3 flatmates and a somewhat confident cat, to a building that has its own postcode and employs people whose sole function is the correct folding of napkins. The adjustment period is not discussed. There is no onboarding. There is only Tuesday and then Wednesday and the cream paper the evening before. Of course, the engagements multiply. By 1983, your face appears in British newspapers roughly 10 times a week, which is basically being the only cast member of a reality show nobody asked you to join and nobody lets you leave. Photographers follow your car. They wait outside the gym. They have learned your patterns better than your own diary has, which is impressive considering your own diary is managed by someone else. The coverage isn't celebratory exactly. It's more like surveillance that has worked out it can charge for itself. And yet the public version of you is always serene. The public version of you tilts her head at exactly the right angle and shakes approximately 4,200 official hands across 16 years with what reads, at distance, as genuine delight. She tours hospitals and opens community centres and stands in high winds looking gracious while her scarf tries to kill her. The private version of you is eating almost nothing, or eating and then undoing it, 4 times on a bad day, in a bathroom near a room where the schedule for Thursday is already typed. The bathroom knows. It doesn't say anything, it just waits. There is one afternoon in December 1985 that belongs only to you, rehearsed in total secrecy, told to no one at the palace, coordinated with dancer Wayne Sleep across weeks of careful logistics that could not appear on any cream paper. On 23 December, at the Royal Opera House, the music starts and you walk on stage and the audience, which includes Charles, does not understand what it is seeing yet. You dance to Uptown Girl, you have practiced every step. The applause is a standing ovation. Charles claps from the front row with the expression of a man watching something he didn't schedule and can't quite file. You are being fitted for the most watched dress in the world, and it no longer fits. They measured you months ago, before the weeks of not eating, and now the ivory silk hangs differently on a smaller frame. There is a 25-foot train to be folded somehow into a glass coach. There are tiaras and timings, and a cathedral already booked. In the days before the wedding, you can barely keep food down, and the women pinning the fabric work quietly around you as you seem to disappear inside your own gown. The dress will be perfect. You are less sure about the rest. The waist was 29 inches when they first measured it. It isn't 29 inches now. The seamstresses don't comment on this. Their faces say something different from their mouths, which say nothing at all. David and Elizabeth Emanuel have designed a gown with a collar of taffeta, hand embroidery, 10,000 pearls, and a train that trails longer than most studio apartments. It weighs roughly 20 pounds. You will carry it down the aisle of St. Paul's Cathedral in front of a global television audience of roughly 750 million people. The dress has a bustle. The bustle has opinions about posture. Let's talk about the morning of July 29th, 1981. You are 19 years old. You have met the groom 13 times. The drive to the cathedral takes you past 600,000 people lining the streets, waving flags at a level of enthusiasm that is less celebration and more collective fever dream. The coach is small, stifling, and crammed with dress. You arrive, and a footman unfurls the train behind you like a very expensive red carpet at an event nobody asked if you wanted to attend. At the altar, under the kind of light that makes everyone look holy whether they are or not, you say the vows. You get the names wrong, not subtly wrong. Not to. You call him Philip Charles Arthur George instead of Charles Philip Arthur George, which is the kind of mistake you make when you've met someone 13 times and the ceremony arrived before the familiarity did. Charles, for his part, forgets to promise you his worldly goods. He skips that part, just moves on. The Archbishop of Canterbury does not pause. The choir does not pause. 750 million people do not pause. You are now married. A photographer named Arthur Edwards, who has spent the better part of a year tracking you through car windows and telephoto lenses, gets a shot of you leaving the cathedral that will run in 17 countries. He has your face memorized. You do not know his name. This is roughly the dynamic you'll be living inside for the next 16 years, except with more people. What the cameras don't catch is a woman named Wendy, a palace housekeeper, standing quietly near the vestry with a cloth and a glass of water, prepared for something she isn't sure of. She has been briefed. She folds the cloth precisely in half. She doesn't use it. The morning goes smoothly, as far as mornings go. There is a balcony kiss. The crowd makes the kind of noise that sounds like weather. Your waist, under the 20-pound dress and its architecture of boning and tulle, is 26 inches now. 3 inches gone somewhere between February and July. The bulimia started roughly a week after the engagement, when Charles mentioned, casually, the way someone mentions the weather, that your waist was a bit chubby. A week later it had begun, and by the wedding it had already become the one thing in your life that nobody else was scheduling. The honeymoon is on the Royal Yacht Britannia. It is not what you expected. Very little from this point forward will be. You walk up the aisle of St. Paul's in front of 750 million people, and you are so frightened that you get his name wrong. You call him Philip Charles Arthur George, shuffling a king's worth of names into the wrong order, and a cathedral full of people pretends not to notice. He, for his part, forgets to promise you his worldly goods. Outside, 600,000 more line the streets. It is, everyone agrees, a fairy tale. From inside the dress it feels like watching yourself from a long way off, doing something enormous that you no longer have any way to stop. The dress has a 25-foot train. That's longer than most London studio flats. It required 4 people to arrange it at the entrance of the cathedral, and it required 4 people to remember it was still attached to you at every turn. It had been fitted months earlier, when you were a different size. It hangs differently now. Nobody says this. The dress knows, and says nothing. There's the matter of Charles's friend. Not a particular friend, just a friend. The kind a man confides in before a wedding. Charles told this friend, sometime before the ceremony, that he was not in love with you but intended to do his duty. This information exists now as historical record. It was shared with you only later, after the fact, after the train had been folded away and the cathedral emptied and the fairy tale was well underway. The friend, presumably, attended the reception. 2 days before the vows, Charles gave Camilla a bracelet. It was engraved GF, Gladys and Fred, private nicknames. A private joke between 2 people who had known each other long enough to need private jokes. You found the bracelet. You knew what it meant. You asked him about it directly, in the way that people ask about things when they already know the answer and are hoping to be surprised. You were not surprised. The lunch that followed was quiet. Margaret Holder, a dresser who helps arrange your veil on the morning of the wedding, tucks one small piece into place with both hands and holds it there a beat too long, the way you hold a door for someone you're not sure is actually coming through. She doesn't say anything. She smooths the fabric with 2 fingers and steps back. It's the kindest thing anyone does all morning. The carriage ride to the cathedral takes you past crowds that seem to have no end. People have been sleeping on the pavement since the night before, which is, in a very specific way, the most devoted thing a stranger can do for you. You will spend the rest of your life trying to understand why they do it. The answer will matter to you more than almost anything else that happens today. The reception at Buckingham Palace seats several hundred people. You eat almost nothing. This is not unusual. You have been eating almost nothing for months. Your waist now 3 inches smaller than when the dress was fitted. The dress quietly adjusted to keep pace. There's a wedding cake, tall, white, and entirely ceremonial. It exists. You don't remember it. By evening, you are on the Royal Yacht Britannia, beginning a Mediterranean honeymoon. The yacht has a crew of 276. There are 276 people on the boat to give you privacy. Charles brings a stack of books by Lawrence van der Post, a philosopher and explorer, and reads them on deck. You watch the water. You have been married for approximately 8 hours. You have met your husband 13 times. You learn there is a third person in the marriage before the marriage has properly started. There is a bracelet, gold, engraved with 2 letters, a G and an F. For the private nicknames he shares with a woman who is not you. He gives it to her 2 days before the wedding. You find out, and you raise it, and you are told, in the gentle institutional manner reserved for these things, that this is simply how matters stand. You are 20 years old, and you have married a man whose heart was already filed away under somebody else's initials. Gladys and Fred. You turn the names over and find nothing in them that helps. They are the kind of nicknames people give each other when they have been close for a very long time, private and unhurried, and completely unbothered by your existence. The bracelet isn't new. Neither, you understand now, is anything else. The timeline has simply been made visible. Camilla Parker Bowles is not a recent development. She and Charles had been close since the early 1970s. She married Andrew Parker Bowles in 1973. Charles attended the wedding. This information is available to anyone who thinks about it carefully, and you have now begun to think about it carefully. You are 20 years old with no qualifications and no precedent for any of this, standing inside a life that was fully furnished before you arrived. The palace has a way of not discussing things. It doesn't argue. It doesn't explain. A member of staff carries a tray past your door. The tray is covered. Another member of staff answers your question with a question of their own that implies your question was the problem. You ask once. You learn not to ask again. The institution has had several hundred years of practice at this, and the practice shows. The covered tray moves on down the corridor. So does everyone attached to it. By early 1982, the bulimia is well established. 4 times a day, some days. The mathematics of it, the timing, the secrecy, the rituals, becomes a kind of schedule inside your schedule. The one part of the day that belongs entirely to you. You have a wardrobe managed by others, engagements booked by others, a public calendar that functions like a court summons. And then there is this. Your waist, which Charles had noted was a bit chubby in the days after the engagement, has dropped from 29 inches to 26. The dress fitted months before the wedding had hung off you by the morning of the ceremony. The institution noted that you looked beautiful. Nobody noted anything else. A lady-in-waiting named Anne catches you once, in the hallway outside your rooms, and asks if you're all right with the specific careful flatness of someone who has been told not to push. You say yes. She doesn't push. The hallway is long and carpeted and swallows the sound of both of you. In February 1982, you are 4 months pregnant with William. You are at Sandringham, which is large, cold, and decorated in the style of a house that has never once considered your comfort as a design variable. You fall down the staircase. Charles's response when he is told is to return to his sketching. Not cruelly, not dramatically, he simply goes back to the page. You are helped up. You are checked. The baby is fine. Nobody asks why you fell. Palace officials, when the question of psychiatric help surfaces, make it clear that such an arrangement would be a media event waiting to happen. The advice is delivered gently, the way they deliver most things. The implication is that the problem isn't the problem, the coverage of the problem is the problem. You are the most photographed woman in Britain. By 1983, your face appears in the papers roughly 10 times a week. A therapist's car in the Kensington Palace Drive would be noticed before it reached the gate, so no therapist. What you get instead is a woman named Debbie Frank, who reads your chart and doesn't work for the palace and has no obligation to report anything to anyone. She arrives, she listens, she offers a version of the future that doesn't feel like a sentence. This is not a small thing. You are not naive about what it is or isn't. But she is the first person in years whose first loyalty is demonstrably not to the institution. She works for you, in this building that is almost unheard of. You find, in a life where other people choose your clothes, your schedule, your words, and your friends, one thing that is entirely your own. It is a small and ruinous kind of control, and it begins about a week after the engagement, After an offhand remark about your waist, you eat, and then you make yourself sick, sometimes several times in a day, and for a few minutes afterward the noise goes quiet. Nobody knows. You become very good at hiding it, because the hiding is part of the point. The tap runs the whole time, covering the sound. Afterward you rinse your mouth, straighten the dress, check your face in a mirror you try not to actually look at, and go back down to lunch. It is the only decision in your whole day that no one else gets to make. By early 1982, your waist is down to 26 inches. At the wedding, it had been 29. The dress, fitted months earlier, hangs differently now, looser at the bodice, the seams sitting on emptiness where there used to be something. A seamstress notices. Nobody says anything out loud, because not saying things out loud is a skill this household has practiced longer than you've been alive. Here is what you've tried instead. You've asked carefully about speaking to someone. A doctor, a therapist, someone who handles this professionally and quietly. The palace's response is essentially, that would be a story. Not a story the way your Tuesday schedule is a story, but a story the way a headline is a story, the kind that runs for 3 days and requires a statement. So the answer is no. You are not mentally ill. You are adjusting. 2 different words. The institution has chosen yours. You turn to what's available. There is Debbie Frank, your astrologer, who arrives with charts and a soft certainty that the stars have noted your difficulty and disapprove of Saturn's current position. There is a tarot reader whose cards always seem to agree with whatever you already believe. There is Simone Simmons, a spiritual healer who places her hands near, not on, near, the places that hurt, and says something is moving. None of them are the Royal College of Psychiatrists. All of them show up. That is not nothing. Your dresser, a woman named Evelyn, quiet, exact, and entirely incurious, folds with the precision of someone who learned origami from a military manual, notices the waist measurement again in 1983, and writes nothing in the log. She smooths the fabric. She moves on. She has been in royal service for 11 years and has the institutional memory of a very well-organized glacier. The body starts keeping its own accounts. A dizzy spell on the back stairs, your hands unsteady at a formal lunch. You sit at a banquet table for 2 hours, smiling at a foreign dignitary, while your vision does something unusual at the edges. Nobody mentions it. The foreign dignitary says you look radiant, which is a thing people say to women whose faces are doing something interesting and unreadable. At its worst, 4 times a day. 4 separate small retreats to a private bathroom. 4 separate silences. The math of it is exhausting even to describe, and you are the one doing it. What the eating disorder gives you is not health, obviously. It gives you authorship, and 1 paragraph in a very long document that someone else is writing, where the handwriting is yours. That's the whole bargain. It is not a good bargain. You know it isn't a good bargain. You make it anyway, because the alternative is a day where not one single thing belongs to you, and that day comes first, and it is worse. You ask eventually for help, and you learn the household's quiet position on help. It would be terribly inconvenient. A doctor leaves a record. A record can be leaked, and so the suggestion drifts back to you, softly, that perhaps you don't really need anyone, that perhaps you might simply manage. There is no category in this house for what is happening to you, no language for it, no slot for it in the day's schedule. You are expected to be cheerful at 3, composed at the unveiling, radiant for the cameras at 6. Whatever is wrong with you is, above all, not to be written down. So you don't write it down. You find other ways to put it somewhere. There's a penknife. There's a razor. There's a glass display cabinet at Sandringham with very clear panels and a satisfying resistance. One afternoon, while the family goes to lunch, just goes, steps around the moment and moves toward the dining room in the ordinary way of people who have somewhere else to be, you throw yourself against it. The cabinet has nothing to add, neither does anyone else. The stairs at Sandringham come later, 4 months pregnant with William, February 1982, and you're at the top of them. What happens next is confirmed later, in print, with the flat certainty of biographical record. Charles's response, once you're at the bottom, is to return to his sketching. He'd been mid-sketch when it happened. It seems he found his place on the page again without much trouble. Then there are the wrists. You cut them in the Kensington Palace bathroom while Charles is down the hall dressing for a black tie event. The event has a start time. The start time is firm. This is what the day contains: a wound, a cufflink, a car at the front entrance. Both things are true at once, and the household absorbs them both with the same calm, practiced and unbothered efficiency it brings to seating arrangements and gift lists. The palace has a very refined tolerance for contradiction. The official position on all of this is essentially there is no official position. Nothing goes in a file, nothing is referred to a specialist. A referred patient has a referral letter, and a referral letter is a document, and documents have a way of becoming front pages. And so the system responds to a woman harming herself inside its walls the way it responds to most inconveniences, with a silence so well maintained it almost sounds like care. A lady-in-waiting named Anne Beckwith-Smith hands you a schedule for Tuesday and straightens a vase on the side table with the brisk focus of someone who has decided the vase is the task available to her. She is not unkind. She is simply operating inside the same institution you are, and the institution has made its preferences clear. You are both, in your different ways, making the best of a room that has no word for what you need. Outside, the papers run your face 10 times a week. You are luminous in every one of them. The photographs are very good. The photographers are very determined, camped at the end of roads, crouched behind hedgerows, telephoto lenses pressed against the general idea of your privacy. It's basically being the only person on a reality show nobody asked you to join, staffed by a production crew you can never identify and can never ask to leave. The audience is 300 million people who are quite sure they know you. They have seen your face so many times it feels like knowledge. Inside, Debbie Frank reads your chart for the week. Simone Simmons holds your hands and says things that are gentle and unverifiable. The tarot reader lays out the cards in a particular order that has never once predicted anything with legal precision, which is perhaps the point. None of them have a clinical qualification. All of them are present. Presence, it turns out, is doing a great deal of work in a house that has formally decided presence isn't necessary. You manage. That is the word for it. You manage. You try to make an inside thing visible because the words have stopped working. You are 4 months pregnant when you fall down the stairs at Sandringham, and the help that comes is medical and brief and careful not to ask the harder questions. Another time you stand in real despair and the family glances over and then goes through to lunch. You hurt yourself in small private ways, and the answer, over and over, is a kind of courteous looking away. The lesson sinks in slowly. In this house, distress is a scene to be managed, and the quickest way to manage a scene is to decline to see it. Charles goes back to his sketchbook. That's the specific detail. Not a phone call, not a closed door, not even a long pause before resuming. A sketchbook, retrieved, opened, and continued. The pencil moves. You lie at the bottom of the stairs at Sandringham, and the official response, once the medical check is done, is a return to the afternoon's original agenda. The afternoon had plans. The afternoon is keeping them. Here is what you do with that. You can't file a complaint. There's no form, no internal process, no HR department at the end of a hallway where someone will take notes and nod seriously. The institution doesn't have a grievance system for the institution itself. What it has is composure, and composure expects composure back. And if you can't manage composure, then you are, unfortunately, the problem that needs managing. So you find a penknife, a razor, a glass display cabinet at Sandringham that meets your shoulder when you throw yourself against it. These are not performances. You've tried performances and they don't work either. These are private negotiations with a body that you can, in this one specific way, actually reach. The eating is another version of the same contract. You can control what goes in and what comes back out. Everything else, the schedule, the wardrobe, the public statements, the guest lists, the curtain call smiles at the bottom of aircraft stairs, belongs to other people. The body is the only jurisdiction that hasn't been signed over. Not entirely. Mrs. Beckwith, the kind of lady-in-waiting whose whole posture is an apology for noticing anything, straightens a vase near the hall table and keeps moving. She doesn't ask. The vase now points in the right direction. The hall is in order. Order is the only service currently on offer. The palace's position on psychiatric care is that the risk of a leak exceeds the risk of leaving things as they are. This is a calculation, and the calculation keeps coming out the same way. The same officials who could arrange a private physician within the hour, who have the numbers, who know the people, who could make the whole thing invisible, decide, repeatedly, that invisible is better achieved by doing nothing. Silence as logistics, absence as policy. Not cruel, not kind, just a decision made on the same spreadsheet as the seating charts. You turn, eventually, to people who are not on the spreadsheet. Debbie Frank reads your chart from 1989 onward and tells you things the palace would never say, which is partly why you keep going back. There's a tarot reader. There's Simone Simmons, who is described in court documents as a spiritual healer and in palace corridors as the sort of person who shouldn't be given the private entrance code, and yet somehow has it. These are not replacements for medicine. They are replacements for being heard, which is a different shortage. The outside world in these same years is receiving 10 photographs of you a week, luminous ones. You at a gala. You in a hard hat at a children's hospital, crouching to be at eye level with a small person who is already more comfortable than you are. You in an evening gown, descending a staircase that is not the Sandringham one, smiling at the bottom with the practiced ease of someone who has made peace with staircases. The photographs are accurate. The photographs are also completely wrong. Nobody is lying, exactly. The camera only ever caught you on the way out. You start keeping appointments the palace would much rather you didn't. An astrologer who reads your chart and, more usefully, simply listens. A tarot reader. A healer who holds her hands near your shoulders and tells you to breathe, and somehow it helps. None of these people work for the household, which is precisely why you trust them. They are slipped into your week through side doors and unlisted numbers, a small private network of comfort assembled entirely off the books. The institution offers you protocol and discretion. These near strangers offer the one thing it never quite manages, which is to ask how you are and then wait for the answer. Debbie Frank starts reading your chart in 1989. She's an astrologer, which means she's also, in practice, your therapist, your sounding board, and the only appointment in your diary that doesn't come with a briefing note. You call her from Kensington Palace on evenings when the corridor outside is quiet in the particular way that means no one is coming. She tells you what the stars suggest. You tell her what's actually happening. The stars, for their part, are diplomatic about it. Simone Simmons holds her hands near your shoulders and says nothing useful by clinical standards. She doesn't prescribe anything, she doesn't document anything, she doesn't report to anyone. What she does is stay in the room and treat you as though your distress is real and present and worth attending to, which, given your recent experience of the medical establishment, makes her the most effective practitioner you've encountered in years. The palace finds all of this embarrassing in the way that only institutions that have nothing better to offer find things embarrassing. Here is what the palace does offer instead. There are doctors, discreet ones, the kind whose primary qualification, in practice, is discretion rather than diagnosis. Psychiatric care is available in theory, but the household makes clear, through the particular British mechanism of heavily implied disapproval, that using it would be unwise. The reasoning is that any consultation might leak, that a file might exist, that somewhere a record would sit in a drawer, and drawers have a way of opening, so the record doesn't exist. Neither, officially, do you. A maid named Angela, small, efficient, and entirely silent, with a habit of straightening things on tables that don't need straightening, hands you a fresh towel on a morning when you've clearly had no sleep, and says nothing. She looks at the dark circles and says absolutely nothing, and you understand that this too is the system working as designed. Not cruelty, not indifference, exactly. Something more institutional than either. The tarot reader comes on a Tuesday. She lays out the cards on a side table in a room that was designed for receiving dignitaries and now hosts a woman with a deck of illustrated cards and a thermos of tea she's brought herself, because she wasn't sure you'd have her kind. You sit across from her on a chair that cost more than most people's cars and feel, briefly, like someone who lives here rather than someone who merely resides here. The cards say the usual things cards say, which is to say they say whatever you need to hear arranged in a framework that feels like structure. Structure, right now, is what you're short of. Of course the tabloids eventually get pieces of this. A. Palace source mentions the astrologer. A columnist wonders, with performed concern, whether the Princess of Wales is in a fit state, the irony being that the palace's refusal to provide actual mental health care is precisely what drove you to the astrologer in the first place. The column doesn't mention this. Columns rarely do. By the early 1990s, you've assembled something small and reliable. A healer, a chart reader, a tarot deck on a Tuesday. None of it is what you'd have chosen in a different life. All of it is what you've built with the available materials, which is more or less how people survive things. You cannot leave the house without being counted. By the early 80s, your photograph runs in the papers roughly 10 times a week, which means somebody is always outside, lens up, waiting. They follow your car. They know your gym, your route, your habits, which door you use. The tabloids are at war with each other and you are the ground they are fighting over, and the rules of that war are brutally simple. Any picture of you is worth money, and there is no picture that is off limits. You learn to assume, every single time you step outdoors, that you are already being photographed. 10 times a week is a misleading number. It's not 10 occasions. It's 10 published photographs, which means the shoots themselves are continuous, a background hum of lenses that never quite goes silent. You're essentially the only person on a reality show nobody asked you to join, and nobody lets you leave. There's no off-camera, there's no green room, there's a black car, and then a crowd of men holding cameras, and then another black car, and then you're home again inside walls thick enough to muffle the sound of them gathering on the pavement outside. The photographers know things about your schedule that your schedule doesn't know about itself. A man named Arthur, who has been shooting royal subjects since before you were born, positions himself outside your Pilates class every Tuesday with the quiet, proprietary air of someone who has reserved a table. He doesn't introduce himself. He doesn't need to. He just lifts the camera when you come through the door. The flash finds your face before your eyes have adjusted to the light. By 1983, this has stopped being attention. The tabloid circulation wars ran on a single fact: your face moved papers, which meant your face was a commodity, which meant the men taking it were not photographers in any meaningful sense. They were harvest workers, and you were the crop. A bad week for them is a week where you stayed inside. A good week is a week where your eyes are red and your coat is slightly wrong and the headline writes itself. Your grief is a front page. Your weight is a front page. The dress you wear to the gym is a front page. The dress that hangs loose now, fitted months earlier, tells a story they're very happy to tell for you. Of course, the palace has opinions about this, not about the photographers, about how you look in the photographs. A quiet word about posture. A quiet word about the choice of coat. The institution that won't arrange a therapist will, the same week, arrange a media consultation. Nobody has to say which one matters more. The diary already has. You develop a face for it. Not a smile, exactly, something more controlled than a smile, less costly to sustain. You wear it the way you'd wear a shoe that fits well enough. It photographs beautifully. People see warmth in it, and there is warmth in it, but there's also calculation, and the calculation is survival. You've learned that the photographers prefer you composed. A composed Diana runs above the fold. A distressed Diana runs on page 3 with a caption that makes it your fault. And yet the volume doesn't flatten. By 1983, the coverage has reached a pitch that a later generation would recognize as stalking, except there's no law for it yet, and the editors call it public interest. You finish a hospital visit, 2 hours of handshakes and eye contact and careful listening, and step outside to find 12 men, jostling, shouting, and sharp-elbowed, standing where a pavement used to be. The flashbulbs go. The shouted questions start. You get in the car. The car moves. 3 of them follow it on motorbikes. Somewhere in the Kensington Palace kitchen, your protection officer writes the debrief. Crowds cooperative, no incidents, standard egress. He doesn't note the motorbikes because motorbikes aren't an incident. They're just Tuesday. You learn to dress like someone preparing for combat, because in a sense you are. The clothes are chosen knowing the cameras will be there, the colour that photographs cleanly, the hem that won't betray you in a gust, the neckline, calculated against 100 simultaneous flashes. You practice the angle of your head. You work out which smile survives reproduction on a front page and which one looks, in cheap print, like a woman about to cry. Getting ready, for you, has stopped being a private act. It is the daily assembling of a surface for several million strangers to pick over at breakfast. The wardrobe isn't yours exactly. There are people whose job is to have opinions about it before you do. Colours are debated, hemlines are escalated to senior staff. The wrong shade of blue in the wrong country carries diplomatic implications that someone, somewhere, has already written a memo about. You are a 32-year-old woman who would like to wear a suit she likes, and instead there is a memo. There is always a memo. And yet the clothes become something else over time. They become the one arena where you learn to push back in a language no one can officially object to. The off-the-shoulder dress at the White House in 1985, the one you wore the night you danced with John Travolta, was not an accident. The low-cut black cocktail dress you wore to a charity gala on the same evening Charles went on television to confirm he had never been faithful, that wasn't an accident either. Diana, a stylist named Anna Harvey at Vogue, once noted, understood clothes the way a general understands terrain. You dress for the cameras the way other people load a weapon. Quietly. With purpose. Without announcing it. Meanwhile, the body underneath the clothes is at war with itself. By 1982, your waist is down to 26 inches, 3 inches less than it was at the altar, where the dress was already hanging loose on a frame that hadn't eaten properly in months. The bulimia runs on a logic that is almost administrative. You can't control the schedule. You can't control the engagements, the wardrobe committee, the seating plans, or the fact that Charles has somewhere else to be most evenings. But this, the purging, the 4 times a day at its worst, this happens on your timeline. The body is the one jurisdiction where no one has filed a memo yet. A dresser named Evelyn, steady-handed, asking nothing, having learned to ask nothing, hands you the shoes without comment. She's noticed the knuckle. She doesn't mention the knuckle. In a household this size, noticing things and mentioning them are 2 entirely separate job descriptions, and she has only ever been hired for one of them. The maths of it is genuinely strange. You are, by any external measure, one of the most photographed women alive. The coverage is global, relentless. 10 photographs a week in the British papers alone by 1983. More if you've been seen doing something as provocative as buying chewing gum. And yet inside the palace, inside the actual physical building, there is almost no one. Vast, carpeted, and soundless rooms with no ordinary noise. Corridors that feel like a country house that has been converted into a museum and then forgotten about. The staff are present the way furniture is present. You could walk the length of a wing and hear nothing but your own footsteps and the specific silence of a building that was designed to impress rather than to hold anyone. You swim laps in the private pool every morning, partly for the body, which is doing its best under difficult circumstances. Partly because it's 40 minutes when nothing is being asked of you, and the water doesn't know what you're worth in newspaper column inches. The pool doesn't have opinions about your waist. That's more than can be said for most of the building. Of course, none of this shows. That's the point. You come out the other side of it. The deliberation, the discipline, the quiet war waged on your own body every morning, and you look, in every photograph taken that day, like a woman who simply got dressed. Clean lines, appropriate colour, the smile that survives cheap print. You've rehearsed it. You've earned it. You're very, very good at it by now, and being very, very good at it costs something that doesn't show up on any official engagement schedule. You decide, against a great deal of advice, to raise your sons slightly wrong. Royal children are meant to be handed to nannies and kept at a stately distance, brought down at appointed hours like a good vintage. You take yours to the cinema instead. You queue with them for fairground rides like anyone else's children. When you tour abroad, you fight to bring the baby rather than leave him for 6 weeks with strangers. Each of these is a small mutiny against a centuries-old way of doing things, and you commit every one of them deliberately, because the alternative is the exact childhood you already know far too much about. William is born June 1982. Harry follows September 1984. You are 20 and 23 when they arrive, which means you are barely old enough to have sorted yourself out, let alone anyone else. The palace has opinions about this. The palace has opinions about most things, delivered quietly and without attribution, the way a draft comes through a window you can't find. The nanny question is not really a question. There will be nannies, Barbara Barnes first, then others, because there's always someone to hand a child to in a building this size. But you are there in the mornings in a way royal mothers aren't supposed to be there. You sit on the floor. You read stories aloud badly, doing all the voices, which a palace aide almost certainly finds undignified, and which you almost certainly do not stop. Nanny Barnes hands William his breakfast with the composed efficiency of a woman who has packed her composure for exactly this posting. You eat yours with him. Here is what you're working against. You grew up in a house that divided itself in 2. Your mother packed and left when you were 7. Custody was awarded to your father in a case the papers covered like a sport, with a winner and a loser and everyone in the village keeping score. You were 8. You believed for years, with the absolute private certainty that only a child can muster, that the split was somehow the result of something you'd done. It wasn't. It doesn't matter that it wasn't. The belief already had its own room. So when the system suggests that children thrive at a regulated distance, supervised, scheduled, and properly managed, you hear something different. You hear your own childhood. You hear corridors. You take William to McDonald's. The tabloids find a story they can actually use. Here is a princess, the most photographed person in the country, appearing in British papers roughly 10 times a week by 1983, tracked at a level that would register today as a formal police matter, queuing at a theme park with a toddler on her hip like someone who doesn't know she has options. The photographers are always there. That doesn't change. What changes is the photograph. Instead of the stiff, formal portrait that the palace would prefer, they get a woman crouching to zip up a child's jacket in a car park. The palace is not enthusiastic about this. The palace expresses its lack of enthusiasm the way it expresses everything, through silence that has structure. Charles is not absent. Exactly. He's there in the ways the schedule allows him to be there. But by the mid-80s, the schedule and the marriage have both developed the same quality, the appearance of a full itinerary with not very much actually inside it. He goes to Balmoral. He goes to Highgrove. He paints. He has his interests and his confidant, and a life that exists at a comfortable angle from yours. You have 2 small boys and a building full of people whose job is to ensure nothing informal ever happens. What you give them instead is specific, not therapeutic, not a program, just specific. Harry gets a story about a bear. William gets his hand held through a crowd. You take them both to see their mother walk into a hospital and shake hands with people the country is actively afraid of, without gloves, without flinching, so that they understand, not in a lesson, just in a fact, what a person can decide to do with a difficult room. The royal family watches this approach to parenting the way you might watch someone rearranging furniture in a house that's been set the same way for 300 years, politely, without touching anything, waiting for you to finish. You swim, most mornings, in the pool at Buckingham Palace, length after length of it, before the day's performances begin. You keep a trainer. You do the ballet exercises you have done since you were a girl, at the Barra, alone. The body the entire world is busy measuring is also the one thing you can drill and discipline into obedience, so you work it hard, daily, methodically. The water is cold at first, then it isn't. Your shoulders burn by the 20th length, and you keep going to the 40th. Nobody is counting but you. Some of this is health, and some of it is something else, harder to name and harder to admit. The exercise is a routine, and it is also somewhere to put everything that has nowhere else to go. The dancing is the part worth lingering on. Not the formal kind, not the charity galas where you float around a ballroom under chandeliers and everybody pretends not to be staring. The real kind. In 1985, you begin rehearsing in secret with Wayne Sleep, a former principal dancer with the Royal Ballet, 5 feet 2 inches of small, springy, and kinetic energy. The number is Uptown Girl. You tell no one at the palace. Not the staff, not the schedule keepers, not the people whose entire function is knowing where you are and what you're doing. You rehearse it anyway, quietly, in the spaces between the places they're watching. On 23 December, at the Royal Opera House, Charles is seated in the front row expecting a standard programme. The curtain opens and you walk out onto the stage. Sleep is already there, grinning. The audience takes a moment to understand what it's seeing. Then the music starts, and you dance, properly, committedly, with turns and lifts, and the kind of physical confidence that is unmistakably not an accident. The standing ovation starts before you've quite finished. You watch Charles's face. He is smiling with his mouth. The performance runs 4 minutes and 22 seconds. You have been rehearsing it for months in a building full of people whose job is surveillance. Nobody caught it. That part, in its way, is also a performance, just for you. The exercise, the dancing, and the swimming are, underneath, the same thing. Your waist, which was 29 inches the morning of the wedding, is 26 inches by early 1982. The bulimia does some of that work. The rest is the pool, the bar, the trainer, the punishing daily arithmetic of the body as project. Meredith, one of the fitness staff, hands you a towel each morning with the careful neutrality of someone who has learned not to comment. The towel is always warm. She always looks slightly past your shoulder. You appreciate both things. The body is the one domain where the instructions are yours. Your schedule is set by others. Your wardrobe is approved by others. The words you say at public events pass through several pairs of hands before they're yours to deliver. But the laps, those are a private contract. The bar exercises, first position through fifth, the pull and resistance of it, those belong to you in a way the 25-foot train never did. Control is the wrong word for it, really. The bulimia isn't discipline. It isn't even really control. It's the shape control takes when everything else has been removed. You know the difference. You've known it for years. Knowing it doesn't stop it. By the mid-80s, you're completing somewhere between 200 and 300 official engagements a year, shaking hands with thousands of strangers, holding children at hospital bedsides, standing in formation for photographs in 30 different cities. The smile is consistent. The posture is flawless. The body does exactly what it's been trained to do. And then you go home and you swim. You are planning a surprise, and the genuinely remarkable part is that you manage to keep it one. For weeks you rehearse in secret with a professional dancer, learning a routine to a Billy Joel song, telling absolutely no one in the palace what you are up to. On the night, you walk out onto the stage of the Royal Opera House and dance, in front of a stunned audience, as a Christmas gift for your husband. There is a standing ovation. For 3.5 minutes you are not a fixture or a photograph or a problem to be managed. You are a person who decided, for once, to do something simply because she wanted to. The dancer is Wayne Sleep. He's 5'2", a Royal Ballet principal, and he receives your phone call with the energy of someone who has been waiting his whole career for this particular ask. You rehearse in private, which in your life means in a borrowed room with no staff present, a locked door, and the specific silence of a secret that has not yet been ruined. The choreography is not complicated. It doesn't need to be. The point isn't the steps. The song is Uptown Girl, which in 1985 is essentially the sound of pure, uncomplicated momentum, the kind of thing that doesn't ask you to feel anything complicated. Just move. You learn where to stand, when to turn, how to hold the counts. Wayne Sleep times his entries with the seriousness of a man diffusing something. You run it again, and again. The routine is 3 minutes and 40 seconds long. You have given longer speeches in more hostile rooms. On the 3rd of 23 of December 1985, you walk out from the wings of the Royal Opera House in front of an audience that has come expecting a traditional gala. The audience does not know what is happening. Charles does not know what is happening. The orchestra has been briefed. The orchestra keeps the secret better than anyone in your life, has kept a secret in 4 years. The music starts. You dance. The audience, a moment ago several hundred stiff, polite and thoroughly composed British people, comes to its feet. Charles, according to every account, has tears in his eyes. He claps. Later he tells someone the performance was the highlight of his Christmas. This is the correct thing to say. He says it. You note the difference between a correct thing being said and a correct thing being felt, and you note it with the particular accuracy of someone who has been paying close attention to that gap for a long time. The standing ovation lasts longer than most conversations you are allowed to have in public. People are applauding something specific, not a title, not a gown, not a charity appearance managed by a press secretary and a schedule. They're applauding a choice. The choice cost you nothing except 6 weeks of secret rehearsal and whatever it took to walk out there. Wayne Sleep takes his bow. You take yours. The curtain comes down, or the moment does, which is the same thing. 3.5 minutes. That is the whole of it. Not a revolution, not a statement. A person, a stage, a Billy Joel song, and a room full of people who did not expect to be moved and were anyway. You go home that night, still the same person you were at 6 in the morning. The schedule resumes. The dress has opinions about what you're allowed to do with your arms. But for one evening, you had the bit in the middle. You are advised, firmly and from several directions, not to do the thing you are about to do. It is 1987, and the country has decided this illness is a sort of moral contamination, something you might catch off a doorknob or a handshake or mere proximity to the wrong kind of person. You are there to open a new ward for exactly those people. The guidance is to wear gloves, keep your distance, smile from a safe remove. Instead, you walk up to a patient and take his hand in both of yours, bare, in front of every camera in the room. You have understood something the institution hasn't, which is that the photograph will do more than any leaflet ever could. The ward is at Middlesex Hospital. It is the UK's first dedicated AIDS ward. The year matters. This is 2 years before AZT becomes widely available, 3 years before Magic Johnson, a full decade before combination therapy makes the diagnosis something other than a sentence. The public understanding of HIV in 1987 is roughly what the public understanding of most things is when fear arrives before science does. Wrong, loud, and very confident about itself. People are losing jobs over it. Families are cutting contact. A nurse named Patricia hands you the schedule for the visit with the careful posture of someone who has already rehearsed the part where you don't go near anyone. You go near everyone. The photographs go around the world by the following morning. Not the ribbon cutting, not the formal remarks, the handshake, bare hands, unhurried, looking directly at the person, the way you'd hold the hands of someone you already knew. It is a photograph of one person holding the bare hand of another, and that turns out to be louder than a decade of public health leaflets. The editorial lines soften within a week. They don't disappear. Nothing disappears that fast, but they soften. Of course, the palace has complicated feelings about this. Not because it's wrong, but because you did it without the 11 approval cycles that precede most royal gestures. The action was yours. The credit was yours. These two facts sit in the private correspondence of several senior advisors like a splinter nobody mentions at dinner. What the work costs is worth naming. You complete roughly 4,200 official engagements over 16 years. Engagements is a pleasant word for stand in a receiving line for 2 hours while strangers decide if you look thin, give a speech that has been approved by 3 different offices, shake 400 hands in a row, smile the entire time, then return to a car and do it again somewhere else. By 1983, photographs of you are running in British newspapers an average of 10 times a week, which is basically being the only cast member on a reality show. Nobody asked you to join, and nobody will let you leave. The cameras are outside the gym. They're outside the school gate. One morning, a long lens catches you on the beach in a swimsuit, and the picture runs on 3 front pages before lunch. Nobody has asked, nobody will ask, and yet the work is also the part that's real. You raise roughly £100 million for charity across those 16 years. The AIDS ward handshake is one moment in a longer habit. You visit leprosy patients in Indonesia and hold their hands too. You sit on the edge of hospital beds rather than standing next to them with a clipboard. Something about the physical contact is deliberate, a posture that says, I am not inspecting you, I am here. Whether this comes from genuine warmth or from years of knowing exactly what it feels like when a room full of people looks through you, or from both, the effect is the same. The landmine campaign comes in January 1997, Angola. Red Cross vest, visor up, walking a cleared path in a minefield while the cameras follow at the permitted distance. The photographs are slightly absurd in the way all royal humanitarian photo opportunities are slightly absurd. The gap between the image and the logistics is enormous, and everyone knows it. But the legislation it helps drive, the Ottawa Treaty, is signed by 122 nations in December 1997. 4 months after the crash, the treaty banning anti-personnel landmines carries your name in the way that only irony can arrange. You didn't live to see it ratified, and it happened anyway, in part because you made the photographs that made the issue impossible to ignore. The institution would much prefer you stay inside the approved framework. The trouble is, the approved framework produces ribbon cuttings, and nobody has ever changed their mind about anything because of a ribbon. You put on a flak jacket and a visor and walk down a cleared lane through a live minefield in Angola, because you have worked out that this is the only way the cameras will follow you to a cause instead of to a hemline. The charity work has quietly become the actual work. Hospitals, hospices, the slow, unglamorous business of sitting with people nobody else photographs. The landmine campaign is the one you push hardest, the one they keep telling you is too political for a princess. You walk the lane anyway. The pictures travel around the world, which was always, in the end, the entire point of you. The flak jacket doesn't fit properly. It was designed for someone broader, someone who ate more regularly, and it sits on your shoulders like a small armoured shrug. A Red Cross official named João walks slightly ahead of you, pointing at the ground with a thin metal rod, narrating the cleared path in a voice that suggests he has done this many times and would prefer you not deviate. You don't deviate. You look at the camera once, briefly, the way you've learned. Not too long, not staged. just enough to confirm the image is real and you are in it. What the pictures show is simple: a woman in a minefield. They don't show the briefings beforehand, or the argument about whether a divorced former royal constitutes a political statement by proximity to a humanitarian cause, or the Foreign Office's quiet displeasure, which is the Foreign Office's loudest register. They don't show the children in the rehabilitation ward you visited after, missing legs at heights that suggest they were very small when they found the mines. You sat with those children for 2 hours. No cameras for that part. The cameras had what they needed. The work gets strange if you look straight at it. You are the most photographed woman in the world, and you have learned to use it the way a surgeon uses a scalpel, precise, deliberate, and entirely unsentimental about what gets cut. The Angola trip runs in January 1997. 8 months later, you are dead. The Ottawa Treaty, signed by 122 nations, comes in December 1997, 4 months after the tunnel. The landmine treaty lands without you, which is either a tragedy or proof that you did the work well enough that it finished itself. Probably both. Back home, the palace machinery notes your Angola trip with the specific silence it reserves for things it cannot stop but does not endorse. A spokesperson named no one in particular says something in the passive voice. You have become, in these final years, genuinely difficult to manage, not because you're unpredictable, but because you're the opposite. You know exactly what you're doing. You always did. The difference is that now you don't pretend otherwise. The work has a physical cost that doesn't photograph. 4,200 official engagements across 16 years means roughly 1 every 36 hours, including the years when you were ill, when the marriage was dissolving in the particular slow way of things that have already ended but haven't been told yet. You have shaken so many hands that your right hand aches in cold weather. You have smiled at the camera from so many angles that you know, without checking, exactly where the light is in any room you enter. That knowledge is not glamorous. It is the accumulated product of being looked at without pause for the better part of 2 decades, which is basically a full-time job that nobody hired you for and nobody lets you leave. The cleared lane in Angola is 50 meters long. You walk it in under a minute. The photograph lasts considerably longer than that. You learn that there is no such thing, for you, as a private telephone call. A conversation you have with a close friend, affectionate, unguarded, full of the small daily miseries of your life, is sitting on a cassette in a stranger's hands, plucked out of the air by someone with a radio scanner and time to spare. It will be printed. So will one of your husbands, even more excruciating than yours. The machinery that listens to you never sleeps and never gives its name, and from this point on you must treat every word you say down a phone line as potentially tomorrow's front page. The call with James Gilby surfaces in 1992, though it was recorded in 1989. He calls you Squidgy 53 times. You count later. The papers count too, and print a transcript helpfully numbered so readers can follow along at home. You are the most photographed woman in Britain and now also the most transcribed. Gilby's voice is warm and concerned. Yours is tired in the specific way of someone who has been performing wellness for a decade and is briefly, dangerously, not performing it. The tape runs 58 minutes. Every minute of it belongs to a stranger. Charles's call is worse. Not for you, technically, but for the reading public, who wake up one morning to find their future king has expressed in print a wish to be reincarnated as a particular item of feminine hygiene. The sentence is reprinted in newspapers across the world. It is discussed on television. It is recited at dinner parties. A palace spokesman does not comment. The palace rarely comments on things that have already happened in front of everyone. Andrew Morton's book arrives in June 1992. You have spoken into a tape recorder, alone in Kensington Palace, answering questions he sent you on paper, and sent the tapes back via a trusted friend. No meeting. No paper trail with your name on it. You denied cooperating entirely until 1997, when the tapes were released after his death, and your voice confirmed what everyone had suspected. The book describes the eating disorder, the self-harm, the marriage's hollow mechanics, and the bracelet engraved GF, Gladys and Fred, that Charles handed to Camilla 2 days before your wedding. It sells immediately and in enormous quantities. It is, in its way, the loudest thing you have ever said. The separation follows in December. Not announced by you, not announced by a press release, not announced by the palace in a measured statement with careful language. The Prime Minister stands up in the House of Commons and tells Parliament, Your marriage is over, John Major. In the chamber. On the record. You hear about this the way the public hears about it, which is to say through the news. The announcement has the emotional intimacy of a planning application. A correspondent named Richard Kay at the Daily Mail becomes, quietly, someone you trust. You call him. He answers. He does not record the calls and use them against you, which at this stage in your life is the baseline qualification for friendship. He writes sympathetically, and you understand that the press, which has consumed your image for 11 years, can also, carefully, selectively, carry your voice somewhere the palace can't easily intercept it. You have been learning, slowly and at great cost, how information moves. You are not entirely without leverage. You are also not safe. Both things are true at the same time, and neither cancels the other out. Meanwhile, a second set of calculations is underway somewhere you can't see. Martin Bashir approaches your brother Charles Spencer in 1995 with documents suggesting your staff are being paid to spy on you. The documents are later found to be forged. Your brother introduces Bashir to you anyway. The Panorama interview airs in November 1995. 15 million viewers. Your eyes steady to camera. Your voice quiet, measured, and precise. There were 3 of us in this marriage, you say, so it was a bit crowded. The line is written down immediately by everyone watching. You knew it would be. You had rehearsed it. The palace is not pleased. Nobody calls to say so directly. Nobody at the palace ever calls to say anything directly. You decide to tell your side, and because you cannot be seen to do it, you do it in secret. You speak into a tape recorder, alone, answering questions passed to you through a trusted go-between, and the cassettes leave the palace by hand for a journalist you will never actually meet. Everything goes on to them. The loneliness, the illness, the third person in the marriage. When the book appears, it detonates, and the fairy tale the country had half believed for a decade is suddenly, publicly over. You have taken the one weapon the institution truly relies on, the control of the story, and quietly walked off with it. Andrew Morton's Diana. Her true story lands in June 1992. It does not land quietly. It lands the way a cake lands when someone drops it from a second-floor window. The structure does not survive, and everyone in the vicinity is aware something has changed. The book sells out within days. The tabloids run excerpts. The palace issues a statement. The statement is formal, brief, and bloodless, and uses the phrase deeply regrettable, which is the royal household's way of screaming. What is actually in the tapes is harder to dismiss, not the headlines. The tapes themselves, your voice, recorded in a room you made sure was empty, describing a marriage in which you cried so often and so quietly that the staff learned to time their rounds around it. You described throwing yourself against a glass display cabinet at Sandringham while the family stepped over the moment and went to lunch. You described cutting yourself. You described an illness that had been present since roughly a week after the engagement, and that nobody in the institution had ever officially acknowledged, because acknowledging it would require acknowledging you were a person and not a feature of the decor. The palace's position on your mental health has always been consistent. The position is, there is no position, because there is no problem, because problems of that kind do not occur in houses like this. The fear isn't for you, the fear is the front page. So the tapes are the front page, and there is nothing left to fear, and you are still alive, which is more than the arrangement had been banking on. A lady-in-waiting named Anne Beckwith-Smith, who has spent years standing approximately 3 feet to your left at every public engagement, holding your coat, anticipating your next move, hears the book is coming and says nothing you can hear. She straightens her posture. She holds the coat. The institution's preferred response to crisis has always been better posture. The separation follows. John Major stands up in the House of Commons on the 1st of 1992 and announces it, which is basically getting your relationship status updated by a man in a grey suit who has access to a lectern and genuinely seems as comfortable delivering this news as any other parliamentary business. There is no prepared joint statement from the couple. There is just the Prime Minister, the Chamber, and the phrase, "It is announced with regret." The divorce finalises on 28 August 1996. 4 years of negotiation, legal manoeuvring, and the quiet choreography of 2 people dismantling a constitutional arrangement. At the end of it, you lose Her Royal Highness. That is the specific thing they take, the title, which means members of the royal household who were formerly your employees are no longer required to curtsy to you. the mother of the future king. No curtsy. The institution has opinions about prepositions and the word former, and those opinions are meticulously enforced. You are still working. You have never stopped working. In those 16 years, you will complete roughly 4,200 official engagements. A number that sounds invented but isn't. You raised about £100 million for charity. In January 1997, 5 months before the crash, you walk through an Angolan minefield in body armor and jeans, shaking hands with landmine survivors, and the photographs go everywhere. 4 months after you die, 122 nations sign the Ottawa Treaty banning anti-personnel landmines. You didn't live to see it. The paperwork went through on schedule. You sit, in the end, in front of a camera and say the quiet parts out loud. You talk about the marriage, about there having been 3 people in it, about wanting to be useful rather than ornamental. No one cleared this with the palace, and that is rather the point. For a woman trained since 19 never to speak first, never to improvise, to keep the surface smooth whatever it costs underneath, simply answering the questions honestly is an act of open rebellion. The household watches, appalled. You have broken the oldest rule there is, which is that whatever it does to you, you are supposed to keep it to yourself. The interview is with Martin Bashir, and it airs on BBC Panorama on 20 November 1995. 23 million people watch it. That is more than Watch the Wedding, which took some doing, given that the wedding had a 25-foot train and a global television audience the size of a small continent. What you say is not particularly dramatic by the standards of what has already leaked, been taped, been serialized, and been read aloud in tabloids across 3 countries. But you say it yourself, in your own voice, calm, deliberate, and entirely unsanctioned. Looking directly at the camera with the eyeliner you applied with the deliberate precision of someone who has decided, finally, to be seen. What you actually say is this. You say you struggled. You say the bulimia was real and lasted years. You say you self-harmed, and you describe it plainly, the arms, the legs, the chest, the kind of plainness that makes the interviewer shift in his chair. You say you didn't want to be the Queen of England. You say you wanted to be a queen of people's hearts. A journalist somewhere writes this down as a soundbite. You meant it as a statement of grief. A senior aide named Patrick Jeffson, your own private secretary, a man who has managed your schedule for 5 years, who has stood in rooms with you across 4 continents, resigns 6 weeks later. He describes the interview as a kamikaze mission. He is not entirely wrong. He is also not entirely right. What looks like self-destruction from the outside looks different from the inside of a system that has spent 16 years telling you that your feelings are a security risk. The Queen writes to both you and Charles in December 1995 and recommends, in the careful language of someone who controls castles, that you divorce promptly. The letter is not unfriendly. It is also not a suggestion. You accept. There's nothing left to protect. The palace withdraws your right to use their communications office. They stop briefing on your behalf. You are, in the language of institutional management, being separated from your support infrastructure, which is a polite way of saying they've turned off the lights and left the building. You hire your own press secretary. Her name is Jane Atkinson. She resigns 8 months later, citing an impossible brief. The brief is, essentially, you, the operational reality of being the most photographed woman in the world, with no institutional machinery behind you, and a press corps that has been following you since 1981, with the dedication of a border collie that has decided you are a sheep. Meanwhile, the photographers do not stop. By 1996, you've been a tabloid fixture for 15 years. 10 appearances a week in the British papers during the high years. Lenses outside the gym. Lenses outside the hospital where you visit patients. One photographer, positioned outside your Kensington Palace apartment, photographs you leaving for an early morning swim and sells it the same afternoon. The photograph shows nothing. He sells it anyway. Nothing, it turns out, has a price. You are 34 years old. You have completed over 4,000 official engagements. You have shaken the hands of AIDS patients in a ward where no royal had stood ungloved before. You have walked through an Angolan minefield in a visor and talked to landmine survivors by name. You have done all of this while purging, while cutting, while living inside a marriage that ended in all but paperwork sometime around 1984. And now you've said it on television, and 23 million people have watched, and the palace is furious, and you are, for the first time in 16 years, precisely where you intended to be. The divorce goes through on 28 August 1996. The HRH goes with it. Former staff who once curtsied to you are no longer required to. This is not accidental. It is the kind of specific, calibrated humiliation that requires a committee. You find out exactly how a royal marriage ends, and it is not with a conversation. On a December afternoon, the Prime Minister rises in the House of Commons and informs the nation, on your behalf, that you and your husband are to separate. The words are read out in a chamber you are not sitting in, to people who have never met you, in the flat administrative tone normally reserved for legislation. There is no private moment, no quiet closing of a door between the two of you. The end of your marriage is government business now, handled by men in suits and timed neatly for the evening news. John Major announces it on 9 December 1992. You are not consulted on the wording. You are not present for the delivery. You find out roughly the same way everyone else does, which is basically the worst possible version of a relationship status update, except the platform is the House of Commons, and the audience is 60 million people. What the separation actually means, day to day, is almost nothing. It means you continue living in Kensington Palace. It means Charles continues living in his various arrangements, none of which require your knowledge or consent. It means the diaries, the engagements, the schedules, all of it continues. You still wave from the same steps. You still shake the same hands. The machinery doesn't pause because the two people operating it have stopped speaking. The machinery has never especially cared whether the two people were speaking. Meanwhile, a committee somewhere is deciding what to do about your title. This takes another 4 years. The divorce is finalised on 28th of August in 1996, and with it goes the style, Her Royal Highness, lifted from your name like a piece of furniture removed from a house you're no longer allowed to fully inhabit. The palace has an opinion about this. The opinion is that it should happen. Nobody calls it a punishment. It lands the way punishments land. What it means on the ground is this. Members of the royal household who were once, technically, your employees are no longer required to curtsy to you. People who stood in your presence and inclined their heads downward, by formal protocol, because you outranked them, they stop. Not because anything changed about you, because a committee updated the paperwork. Imogen, one of the ladies in waiting, adjusts her posture slightly the first time she sees you afterward. She doesn't meet your eyes while she does it. She has the expression of someone who has been given new instructions and would prefer not to explain them. You are still the mother of the future king. That part doesn't change. That part, the palace cannot update with a memo, so you're demoted from a job you can never actually quit, which is a specific kind of institutional arrangement that has no modern equivalent and probably shouldn't. The public does not process the title removal as a technical administrative action. The public processes it as cruelty, slow, deliberate, and precisely aimed by an institution that has decided you are the problem. The flowers start appearing outside the palace gates almost immediately. Not yet the millions that will come later, but enough. Enough to make clear that the accounting the institution is doing and the accounting the public is doing are not the same accounting. You complete 4,200 official engagements across 16 years. You raise roughly £100 million for charity. You shake hands with AIDS patients when the institution would prefer you didn't. You walk through minefields in Angola in January 1997 wearing no body armour and a visor, because you have decided that the thing you can still do is be physically present where the cameras will follow you anyway. The Ottawa Treaty, 122 nations, a ban on landmines, is signed in December 1997, 4 months after you die. The paperwork catches up. It always does. You sign the papers and discover that the institution can take back parts of your name. The divorce is finalised, the terms are settled, and out with them goes the style you have carried for 15 years, Her Royal Highness. It sounds like a technicality. It is nothing of the kind. It means that women who once curtsied to you no longer have to, that with a single clause you have been moved down the invisible staircase that decides who bows to whom. You keep the apartments and the word princess, but the household has made its point. You were always, underneath it all, something the family could promote or demote at will. Here's what the title actually did. Not what it meant ceremonially, what it did to the room. When you walked in with HRH attached to your name, people arranged themselves around you in a particular way, slightly angled, slightly deferential. The way office furniture gets rearranged around a new partition wall, without it the furniture stays where it is. You are the one who has to navigate around it. A woman named Joanna, who had dressed your hair for 3 years, now stands straight-backed when you enter. She is polite. She is perfectly polite. The politeness is the point. The settlement includes a lump sum of £17 million and an annual allowance. It includes a driver, staff, and continued residency at Kensington Palace. It does not include a map for whatever comes next, and no one offers one. You are 35. You have completed roughly 4,200 official engagements. You have raised close to £100 million for charity. You have shaken hands with hundreds of thousands of strangers, photographed at each one, approximately 10 times per week in British papers alone for over a decade, which is basically being the only cast member of a reality show you never auditioned for and can't leave, except the show has been running since you were 19 and nobody told you there were cameras. The landmine work continues. January 1997, Angola. You walk through a partially cleared minefield in body armor while photographers with telephoto lenses stand at a very safe distance and take your picture. There is something almost funny about this. Almost. The images go everywhere. The Ottawa Treaty is signed in December 1997. You are not alive to see it. The treaty bears no dedication. There is no clause that says your name. The ground just gets safer, quietly, for people you'll never meet. The papers, all the while, are still working through their inventory. In 1997, the paparazzi have been at this for 14 years without meaningful consequence. A photographer named Lionel Chareur once hid in the boot of a car outside your gym. Not a metaphor for the industry, an actual boot, an actual car. The tabloid appetite that fed this hadn't changed since the circulation wars of the early 80s. It had just more practice and better lenses. There is a bodyguard named Ken Worf who watched these last years up close, and what he saw was you finally starting to work out what you actually wanted. You're learning to cook. You're spending longer stretches with William and Harry. You're sleeping better. He describes it the way you'd describe someone who has just found the right pace on a long trail, and then he stops short because of what comes next on that trail and what it costs to say out loud. The summer of 1997 you spend partly at the Al-Fayed family compound in the south of France, partly working out what exactly is happening with Dodi, partly being photographed on a boat in a swimsuit in what the editors will later call, without irony, a privacy invasion. You are 36. The dress code is casual. The institution is, for the first time in 15 years, not in the room. You wake up, for the first time in your adult life, outside the marriage, and the days are suddenly yours to fill. You cook for yourself in the evenings in your own kitchen. You see the friends you actually choose. You plan the work you want to do rather than the work assigned to you, but the cameras have gone nowhere. If anything, a single newly free princess is worth a great deal more to them than a married one ever was. The cage door is standing open. The crowd outside it, however, has only grown larger, and you are about to learn that freedom and safety were never quite the same thing. The summer of 1997 has a particular quality to it, lighter in some ways. You are 35 years old, which is both young and, given the previous 16 years, somehow ancient. You have an apartment at Kensington Palace, a swimming pool you use every morning at a pace that would trouble most people, and a charitable operation that has started to move governments. The Angola landmine images from January are still circulating. Actual governments are still arguing about what to do with them. You are not sure what you are now, exactly. Not royal, not civilian, not quite either. But the work has a momentum you can feel in your hands. Dodi Fayed is new. You met his father first, Mohammed Al-Fayed, through polo years earlier. The way a certain stratum of British life keeps collapsing into itself at equestrian events. Dodi himself is charming, easy, and attentive in the specific way of men who have money enough that they never need to be inattentive. The summer invitation to the Al-Fayed yacht is warm and easy in the way that almost nothing in your previous life has been warm or easy. The sea is the Mediterranean. The photographers are, of course, also there. They are always there. They have been your shadow for 14 years and they do not take summers off. Those photographers, again. By August 1997, the tabloid industry surrounding you is not really a press operation anymore. It's closer to a commodities market, except the commodity is your face in an unguarded moment. A photograph of you and Dodi together is worth enough money that men will rent motorbikes and hire boats and wait for hours on a harbour wall in the dark. The paparazzi don't go home. They rotate. It's basically shift work, except instead of clocking in at a warehouse, they're following a woman who just wants to have dinner. One photographer later estimates that a single clear shot of you kissing Dodie that summer was worth £250,000. £250,000 for a photograph. The camera has been a tool in your life for so long that you have occasionally used it deliberately, strategically, as a way to speak when the official channels were closed. That's still true. The arrangement has just never, in 16 years, been mutual. The Ritz Paris, on the 30th of August, is busy in the way that expensive hotels are always busy, which is to say full of people pretending not to notice each other. You and Dodie have dinner in the Imperial Suite rather than the restaurant, specifically because the restaurant has photographers waiting outside. The Imperial Suite does not have photographers. This is the advantage of the Imperial Suite. Henri Paul, the deputy head of security, is recalled from his evening off to drive you. He is not your regular driver. Your regular driver is elsewhere. This detail will matter enormously in about 3 hours, and right now it is simply a logistical inconvenience managed by a hotel functionary with a phone. A security aide named Thierry Rocher watches Henri Paul in the hotel bar before the departure. He will later say Paul seemed fine. Fine, in that particular context, will become one of the most contested words in a decade of inquiries. The Mercedes leaves the Ritz at 12:20. The Pont de l'Alma tunnel is about 1.5 miles away. Between the hotel and the tunnel, the motorcycles follow. There are at least 6. The speed inside the tunnel reaches somewhere between 96 and 102 kilometers per hour. The limit is 50. This is the kind of detail that sounds dry and technical until you picture it, and then it doesn't sound dry at all. Pillar 13 is a concrete support column. It has no idea it is about to become famous. It is just a pillar, doing its job, holding up a road. You spend the last summer of your life being hunted across the Mediterranean. There is a new relationship, and there are photographers in boats, on scooters, in the lobbies of hotels, each picture of you selling for more than most people earn in a year. On the final night, in Paris, the crowd of them outside the hotel is simply too thick to walk through. So a plan is made, a fast car, a back exit, a driver called in specially to lose them in the dark. It is the kind of decision people make 100 times over to buy 10 ordinary minutes of peace. This time the 10 minutes will not come. Henri Paul, then. He is called back to the Ritz at around 10 that evening, having already gone off shift and gone home. He returns in good spirits, visibly relaxed, chatting with photographers in the lobby, the same photographers who will, within the hour, be chasing him through a tunnel. He passes a roadside alcohol test at the hotel. He does not appear impaired. Nobody in the lobby raises a hand. The Mercedes pulls out at 12:20 am, and what happens next happens fast. Less than 4 minutes from the hotel to the Pont de l'Alma, most of it at speeds the road was not designed to accommodate. The tunnel is not dramatic from the outside. It runs beneath the Place de l'Alma, a short, low, unremarkable underpass, the kind of infrastructure you pass through without registering. The speed limit is 50 kilometers per hour. The Mercedes enters at somewhere between 96 and 102. A white Fiat Uno pulls into the lane ahead, and the Mercedes clips it. A small event, physics-wise, the kind of contact that at legal speeds produces an insurance form. At this speed, it produces a loss of control. The car strikes pillar 13 at 12:23 am. Dodie Fayed and Henri Paul die at the scene. Trevor Rees-Jones in the front passenger seat survives with catastrophic facial injuries. He has no memory of the impact. The car has an airbag. The rear seat does not. Diana is alive when the first medical team arrives at 12:32 am. She has a traumatic rupture of the left pulmonary vein, a deep interior injury, not visible from outside the body, the kind that can be easily missed in the first minutes when someone looks conscious enough, breathing enough, present enough. French emergency protocol treats at the scene rather than rushing to hospital. She receives 45 minutes of roadside care in the underpass. She reaches the Pitié-Salpêtrière hospital at approximately 2 am. She is pronounced dead at 4 a.m. on the 31st of August, 1997. She is 36 years old. The 45 minutes are the part that never quite closes. British protocol would almost certainly have transported her immediately, the surgical team, not the roadside, being where a pulmonary rupture has any real chance. French protocol is not wrong, exactly. It reflects a different philosophy about stabilization before transit. What it means, in this specific case, in this specific tunnel, is that she spends those 45 minutes in the place she was hurt rather than in the place that might have helped. The hospital is 4 miles away. The surgeons are waiting. The ambulance is stationary. Back in London, the news arrives at Balmoral, where the royal family is in residence for the summer. The Union flag above Buckingham Palace does not lower. It will not lower for several days, a distinction the palace draws because the flag there flies only for the sovereign, but the public, gathering in growing thousands at the gates, bringing armfuls of flowers and handwritten notes and soft toys, does not know this distinction and does not find it comforting. 4 miles of people queue to sign the condolence books. £15 million of flowers bank up against the iron railings, and the smell of them, lily and chrysanthemum and cellophane-wrapped carnation, sits over that part of London for a week like something that can't decide whether it's a garden or a funeral. You leave by the back of the hotel a little after midnight, into a car that pulls away fast with the scooters already swarming behind it. The road dips down into a tunnel that runs beside the river. What happens there takes only a few seconds. Too much speed, a clipped wing mirror, a concrete pillar, a sound, and then a terrible stillness with the engine still ticking. 2 of the 4 people in the car are gone at once. You are still here, for now, and the people who arrive work over you for a long time on the tunnel floor. It is the 31st of August. You are 36 years old. What comes after isn't the grief, it's the questions. Because from the moment the news breaks, Mohammed Al-Fayed is standing in front of a microphone saying the word murder, and he does not stop saying it for the next 11 years. His theory arrives fully assembled, no missing pieces, no second thoughts, the rare conspiracy that comes flat-packed with every screw included. MI6 ordered it. Prince Philip signed off on it. The goal was to prevent a Muslim man from marrying the mother of the future king. He adds that you were pregnant with Dodi's child. He adds that you were engaged to be married. He names a white Fiat Uno that clipped the Mercedes in the tunnel as the active instrument of the plot, and he names the driver as a French photographer named James Anderson. The white Fiat is real. There was, genuinely, a small white car in the tunnel that night, and it left without stopping, and finding it becomes one of the central obsessions of the investigation. The paint transfer on the Mercedes is real. The witness accounts of a white car are real. James Anderson owned a white Fiat Uno. He sold it in 1997. The car is examined years later by investigators who find no matching transfer, no matching damage. Anderson himself dies in 2000 in a burned-out car in a French forest, ruled suicide. Al-Fayed calls this evidence. The investigators call it a coincidence that closed a lead. Then there are Henri Paul's blood samples. The official toxicology shows his blood alcohol at roughly 3 times the French legal limit. Independent analysts look at the same samples and flag something strange. Carbon monoxide levels so high that a living man carrying them should have been unconscious before he reached the car. The anomaly is real. What it means is genuinely disputed. It feeds a decade of argument about whether the samples were Paul's, whether they were contaminated, whether someone substituted them. The official French inquiry, closed in 1999, calls it a data irregularity and moves on. The conspiracy community calls it the whole case. Operation Paget arrives in 2004. Lord Stevens. More than 200 investigators, 175 witnesses, 31 countries, an 832-page report. The longest, costliest, and most exhaustively footnoted way anyone has ever been told that a drunk man drove too fast, lands in 2006 saying, no pregnancy, no engagement, no conspiracy, the forensics find no pregnancy. Rosa Monckton, one of your closest friends, confirms you were menstruating the week of the crash. The engagement ring Al-Fayed describes does not appear in any evidence. The MI6 order does not appear in any evidence. The 2007 inquest under Lord Justice Scott Baker, the longest in British legal history, returns the same finding: grossly negligent driving, aggravated by pursuing photographers, and a driver who was 3 times over the limit and driving at roughly double the speed of the road. Marguerite, a forensic consultant brought in during the inquest, sets a thick folder on the table beside her with the practiced calm of someone who has done this in front of juries before. She doesn't look up. She just opens it. The numbers are the same numbers they've always been. The road is 50 kilometers per hour. The car enters at 96 to 102. The pillar is pillar 13. What the investigation can't resolve, what no investigation can fully resolve, is why a driver who had been tested, vetted, and approved by the Ritz's own security protocols ended the night 3 times over the legal limit. That question doesn't have a conspiracy answer, it just has a bad one. The kind of answer that doesn't feel proportionate to what was lost, the kind that makes people keep looking for a different one. Your landmine treaty is signed by 122 nations in Ottawa 4 months after you die. You are not there. You do not get to die quietly, because almost before the flowers at the gates have wilted, a second story begins. The one insisting this was no accident at all. The father of the man who died beside you is convinced of it, and says so loudly, for years. His version has a clear shape, that you were pregnant, that an engagement was coming, that the mother of a future king carrying this particular child was intolerable to certain powerful people, and that the secret services arranged the tunnel to make the difficulty disappear. He names names, some of them very high indeed. Whatever the truth turns out to be, grief has met suspicion, and suspicion is in no hurry to let go. Here is what Operation Paget actually finds. 200 investigators, 175 witnesses, 832 pages, 3 years. It is the most thoroughly documented shrug in the history of British law. The report addresses the pregnancy claim directly. You were menstruating at the time of the crash, confirmed both by Rosa Monckton, who was with you days before Paris, and by forensic examination. The engagement claim finds no ring, no announcement, no record. Friends interviewed described Dodie as someone you liked, someone you were enjoying, not someone you had agreed to marry. The Fiat Uno question takes longer. The white car was real, paint transfer confirmed, and it was in the tunnel. A photographer named James Anderson owned a white Fiat Uno. In 2000, 3 years after the crash, Anderson's body was found in a burned car in southern France, ruled suicide. The theory writes itself from there. He was silenced, the car was destroyed, the evidence went with it. Paget investigators test the paint from Anderson's vehicle against the transfer on your Mercedes. It doesn't match. The car was, of all the anticlimaxes, simply a different white, the kind of detail that quietly closes a case and noisily opens 1,000 forum tabs. A coroner named Martine Monteil, who had possession of a lock of hair, notes a carbon monoxide reading in Henri Paul's blood at a level that should have rendered him unconscious. This detail refuses to dissolve. Independent analysts flag it across years of published commentary. A number that high, they say, belongs to someone found near an idling engine in a closed garage, not behind the wheel of a car that had just been driven across Paris. Paget can't fully explain the anomaly. It notes it and moves on. Meanwhile, a retired French police officer named Hervé Stéphan, who led the original inquiry, stands by his findings. Henri Paul's blood alcohol was roughly 3 times the legal limit. The Mercedes entered the tunnel at nearly double the speed limit. The paparazzi pursuit was real, documented, and reckless. The tunnel was dark. The pillar was concrete. There is, says every official account, a very short and very unglamorous explanation for what happened. But the thing about a story that won't let go is that it doesn't need evidence. It needs texture. And this one has it. A powerful family with a grieving father who will not stop. A blood sample with a number no one can explain away cleanly. A car that was in the tunnel and a man who owned one like it, and then died in a fire. None of these things, investigated individually, produce a conspiracy. Together, they produce something that feels like one. The feeling and the fact are not the same thing. They don't have to be to keep the story alive. The 2007 inquest under Lord Justice Scott Baker runs for 6 months and becomes the longest inquest in British legal history. The jury returns a verdict of unlawful killing due to grossly negligent driving by Henri Paul and by the pursuing vehicles. Not murder, not assassination, grossly negligent. The jury is specific about this. They have sat through the evidence. They return a verdict that is, in its way, the most mundane possible outcome for the most watched death of the 20th century. Someone in the gallery weeps. Someone else is already on a forum explaining why the verdict can't be trusted. You become, in death, the subject of the longest inquest in the country's history. There are real loose threads here, and for the better part of a decade people pull hard at every one of them. A white car, glimpsed and never properly traced, that yours may have touched in the dark. a driver whose blood holds a chemistry that doesn't quite add up, a photographer who happened to own just such a car and later died in a fire, ruled a suicide. 200 investigators, 175 witnesses, and 800 pages of report are eventually thrown at the question. They follow each thread to its end and arrive at the answer almost nobody wanted: a drunk driver going too fast in a tunnel. The carbon monoxide reading is the one that keeps pulling at people. Henri Paul's blood, per the samples, shows levels that would normally leave a person struggling to stay upright. And yet the security footage at the Ritz has him walking, talking, arguing about which car to take. The anomaly is real. The official explanation, sample contamination, a known hazard in compressed chamber blood storage, exists, and the independent analysts who flag it exist too. Lord Stevens and his team review both sets of evidence at length. The samples can't be retested. Some questions can't be closed. They stay open, sitting quietly inside an 800-page document like a footnote that knows it's doing more work than a footnote should. James Anderson is the thread people pull hardest. He's a freelance photographer. He owns a white Fiat Uno. He was, on the night in question, in a different location, and has witnesses who say so. He dies in May 2000, in a burned car in a field near Nîmes. The fire ruled a suicide. His Uno is examined by forensic specialists looking for paint transfer consistent with a tunnel impact. None is found. Operation Paget notes this clearly. And yet the timing of his death, the circumstances, the photographs he'd sold of you for years, the whole file just sits there radiating suspicion at everyone who opens it, like a smoke detector chirping somewhere in a house where nobody can find the smoke. Suspicion isn't evidence. Anderson knew that. The tunnel didn't care. Mohammed Al-Fayed never changes his position. Not once. Not by a comma. Prince Philip ordered it. MI6 carried it out. You were pregnant with Dodi's child and engaged to be married. That is the claim, at least. And the establishment moved to prevent it. He names names. He maintains this through the French inquiry, through Operation Paget, through the 2007 inquest, with the consistency of a stubborn, grieving, uncertain man who has decided what he believes and has stopped treating evidence as relevant to the question. Rosa Monckton, one of your closest friends, states clearly that you were menstruating in the days before the crash. The forensic evidence from the crash itself finds no pregnancy. The Operation Paget report devotes considerable space to the engagement claim and finds no ring purchased, no announcement planned, no record of any proposal. The pregnancy, not confirmed. The engagement, not confirmed. The conspiracy, not confirmed. Lord Justice Scott Baker sits with the inquest jury from 2007 into 2008. It is the longest inquest in British legal history, which you've earned, apparently, by dying in a way that creates this many questions in this many people at the same time. The jury returns a verdict of unlawful killing by grossly negligent driving, Henri Paul's, and the pursuing vehicles whose chase fed his speed. Not murder. Not a staged accident. A crash. A bad one. In a tunnel. At double the limit. Because someone made choices that couldn't be taken back. Annette, the stenographer who types the final verdict summary, pauses before continuing. You can't know that. But it's the kind of moment that earns a pause. The Ottawa Treaty banning anti-personnel landmines is signed in December 1997, 4 months after the tunnel. 122 nations. Your name is in the room without you in it, the way it often was. You will never see the response to your death, which is perhaps a mercy and perhaps the cruelest part of all. The flowers arrive in their millions, banked meters deep against the palace gates. The queue to sign the books of condolence stretches for miles and takes hours to reach the front. A prime minister gives you a new name on a grey morning, the People's Princess, and it sticks for good. And 4 months later, the treaty you fought for, the one banning the mines that tore people apart in places no camera ever went, is signed by half the world. You spent 16 years being told the work was too political for you. The work outlived you regardless. What 4,200 official engagements actually looks like is this. It's a hand extended in a hospital ward where nobody else will extend one. It's crouching down so a child in a wheelchair doesn't have to look up at you. It's Angola in January 1997, walking a cleared path through a minefield in a visor and protective gear, photographs landing in every paper on Earth, making it impossible for anyone to say the issue was abstract. The institution thought the landmine campaign was embarrassing. The institution was embarrassed about a lot of things that turned out to matter. The AIDS ward visit in 1987 is worth pausing on. You walk into the Middlesex Hospital's dedicated ward, the first of its kind in Britain, and you shake hands. No gloves. That detail, the absence of gloves, is the whole point, because the fear at the time, loud, confident, and wrong, was that casual contact could transmit the virus. And the fear was wrong, and most people knew it was wrong, but nobody official was willing to make the gesture. You make it. A photographer named Arthur Edwards is there. The photograph runs everywhere. It doesn't cure anything. It shifts something anyway. Meanwhile, the palace continues its general policy of finding your charity work either too emotional, too hands-on, or too likely to upstage someone. You raised roughly £100 million across your 16 years. The number lives in a press release somewhere. The institution found your instinct for proximity, the crouching, the touching, the staying past the allotted time, professionally irregular. There's a performance that belongs here too, because it tells you something. December 1985. You rehearse an entire surprise ballet to Billy Joel's Uptown Girl in total secrecy, with Wayne's sleep, 6 weeks of preparation, no one at the palace informed. You perform it at the Royal Opera House on the 23rd as a Christmas gift for Charles. The audience gives you a standing ovation. Charles's face in the photographs is doing something complicated. You take 6 curtain calls. Wayne Sleep, who spent his career on professional stages, later described the rehearsals as some of the most joyful he'd had. You had nowhere to put joy that year except secretly. A grief counsellor named Mary Llewellyn, who worked the condolence queues in September 1997, later wrote that many people she spoke to couldn't fully explain why they were there. Some had never met you. Some had read about you every week for 15 years and felt, despite everything, that they knew something true. The flowers at the palace gates eventually reached an estimated 15 million individual stems. Someone had to count them. The counting took days. The Ottawa Treaty was signed on 3 December 1997 by 122 nations. The British government, which had declined to support your Angola trip as official policy, signed it. The signing was 4 months and 3 days after the tunnel. Your name isn't in the treaty. The mines are. And so we reached the end of a very long 16 years, a marriage that looked, from the street, like a fairy tale, and felt, from the inside, like a very grand house where someone had quietly taken all the door handles off. You wandered the carpeted corridors of Buckingham Palace at night with no one to call. You stood in a cathedral in front of 750 million people and got the grooms' names in the wrong order. You swam your laps before the cameras woke up. You shook the hands the institution would rather you didn't, danced a dance nobody had approved, and walked a cleared lane through an Angolan minefield in a flak jacket built for a larger person. You were frightened and funny and stubborn and kind, and the building around you never quite found a word for any of it, so pull the blanket up. There's running water down the hall, a lock on a door that's yours, and a name no Act of Parliament can take back. Tonight, nobody is keeping a record of your waist. Let your shoulders drop. Let the long corridors go dark. Let the morning be the one appointment nobody else booked. Sleep well.